Hey guys, welcome to the 14. I'm Nick Cole, and we're breaking down each SEC football game in week 9 from a betting perspective. Today, we're talking about the Missouri Tigers visiting the Vanderbilt Commodores. This game's going to be played at 3 p.m. Eastern time, which is 2 local time in Nashville. It's game's going to be played at Vanderbilt Stadium, and it will be on the SEC network. From a betting perspective, this game opened with Missouri as a 17-point favorite. That line's moved slightly. They're now a 16.5-point favorite as of Thursday afternoon. The over-under for this game, it opened at 63.5, and it has moved to 62.5 as of the recording of this video. I'll bring in our betting analyst, Christopher Smith. Christopher, what do you make of this battle at the bottom of the SEC East?
Well, they say good teams win and great teams cover. And I think the beauty of betting on college football is a game like this will be just as exciting as any other game if you got some action on it. So hopefully we can get you on a winner. But why don't you get into the injuries, the weather, and Nick's news and notes?
Sure. So let's start with the weather. In Nashville on Saturday afternoon, we should be seeing temperatures in the 50s and 10 to 15 mile per hour winds during the day. Although I think around kickoff, it should be closer, maybe 7 to 10 miles an hour. Still, that wind's something to watch because there are going to be storms in the area on Saturday morning. They should clear out before kickoff. But again, that's something to watch from a game condition standpoint there. On the injury side of things, let's start with Vanderbilt first. Safety DeRicky Wright is questionable for this game. And of course, quarterback Ken Seals, who's missed the last couple of games with a hand issue, is still considered week to week. But according to Coach Clark Lee, he's, quote, nearing the end of his recovery. So we may be sooner than we anticipated to seeing Ken Seals back on the field. Of course, Mike Wright has been starting in his place for the Commodores. On the Missouri side of things, right guard Case Cook is out for the season, as is swing defensive end Chris Turner. The team's fourth defensive end behind Turner, Johnny Walker Jr., is considered questionable for this game. Wide receiver Mookie Cooper is also questionable. Cornerback Ishmael Burdine is questionable. Defensive tackle Akil Byers, who is the team's third interior lineman, is also questionable, along with 2 other depth pieces along the defensive line there. So a lot of questionable tags for the Tigers, probably something to look at on Saturday afternoon as they take the field for warm-ups if you're concerned about what you're going to see from a Tigers defense that already has its own set of issues. Moving into Nick's news and notes, let's start with just this question I want to pose you, Christopher. Maybe you can answer with your analysis. But what happens when a really bad offense meets a really bad defense in SEC conference play? Because I think that's what we're going to see on Saturday. Commodores have been without their starting quarterback, without their starting running back who's been out for the season with an injury, and just a little bit of issue at every other position, really, if we're being honest. We'll take on a Missouri defense who is inarguably one of the worst in the league and perhaps the very worst when it comes to rushing defense. So when you got a team that can't run the ball consistently, playing a team that can't stop the run consistently, it should be fascinating. I'm not really sure. The next thing I would say is just point out to you that the last timeout between these two teams in 2020 might be telling as we look at trying to bet this game. A Drinkwitz-led Missouri team beat a winless Vandy team 40-0 last year at Faurot Field. Now, some circumstances have changed. Obviously, Vanderbilt's got a little bit more momentum going this season with Clark Lee than they did under the final year Derek Mason, sure. And we have this game venue changing from Missouri to Vanderbilt, so maybe there's that. I don't know that such a thing as home field advantage exists for the Commodores right now, but at least it's not having to go on the road. But is anything else change significantly enough in these two programs for us to expect much different of an outcome than a 40-point spread? And Christopher, I'll leave this to you to determine with the underlying stats. Are there things that point out that maybe the Commodores will keep it closer than they did last year?
Well, I definitely think this is a game that is sort of quirky when you try to handicap it, right? I sort of like the seasons. I know we've had a season or two where college football teams had 2 bye weeks, and then we had last season, which was all over the place in terms of scheduling. But this year was interesting to me because this is the most concentrated I can remember in terms of SEC bye weeks. I think we may have had 11 or 12 of the SEC teams all have their bye weeks either last weekend or this weekend. You got to wonder how much of that is a factor because Missouri is coming off of their bye week, and Vanderbilt is the exception to the rule and hasn't had a bye week yet. It's hard to say that Vanderbilt's roster is built to go 2-3 deep in the SEC every week and be fine and rested and all that kind of stuff. So interested to see if that comes into play. The other thing is Missouri runs this offense through Tyler Beatty, right? They don't really have the receivers on the outside to burn you or crush SEC competition. Vanderbilt's run defense is 118th in EPA. And even if you do throw the ball, Vanderbilt's 129th in sack rate. So they're getting to the quarterback as little as any team in the country is getting to the quarterback. So if you're Missouri, another quirky thing to try to handicap in this game is this is your one chance, as you see with a lot of teams in the SEC this season, except for South Carolina, who doesn't have a good enough offense to really take advantage of Vanderbilt. This is your one chance to maybe try to run up the score and look good and put up a big number. So does that make Missouri approach this more aggressively, or do they take more of a conservative approach and just try to get a win, or how do they play this? The biggest thing with Missouri in any game this season is their run defense, which I believe you mentioned a little bit or alluded to, and they're 130th in EPA per snap on run defense. So you can make the case that they're the worst run defense in the country. Now, they've probably faced a harder schedule than maybe a few other teams, and EPA is not weighted for competition, but Vanderbilt is 128 in opportunity rate, which is basically anytime there's 4+ yards available, what percentage of the time do you get at least 4 yards? And they're 116th in stuff rate, which has to do with how many times are you allowing a tackle for loss when you run the ball, and 112th in EPA per rush. So the other thing is, you mentioned a bunch of injuries around Missouri's defensive line, but as strange as this may sound, I actually think that matters very little for Missouri, just because you're already at a replacement level or lower. Like your starters are, maybe below replacement level in the SEC. So it's not like you're missing out on some big talent that is going to really hurt your team when you put somebody else in there. I mean, if your starters are going, Olay, see ya, then you can find a backup to do that probably just as easily. So a lot of things that I think are quirky or unusual to handicap that maybe if you're really close to one or both of these programs, you can maybe get a good handle on. But otherwise, it may be a little tough to find an edge on the market, on the betting market as a whole in this game for me personally. But Nick, how are you betting on this game on the side and the total?
Yeah, so I look at how Missouri beat Vanderbilt last year and think, is that something they could replicate this season? They just ran the ball and ran the ball and ran the ball some more. And ultimately, I think the answer is yes. The Tigers offense has proven more than capable of replacing Larry Roundtree. Tyler Beatty, as you said, has been very effective this season. And I don't see any reason that coming off a bye week with a fresh script and some fresh legs that the Tigers can't run the ball effectively. So for that reason, I'm going to take Mizzou minus 16.5. But then also for that reason, I think I like that script to be under 62.5, which is a pretty high total for a Commodores team to be involved. I mean, they have given up their fair share of points, don't get me wrong, and I think they still probably will in this game. But can we really expect them to score much more than 20 points? And, if they do score 20 points, that still allows for Mizzou to score 42 points and us to be just under that 62.5. So that's what I'm going to take. How are you viewing this one?
Yeah, so I think, Nick, last week we were talking about the SEC games, and you were saying to yourself that you found it really tough to find a bet that you actually liked in the conference last week with basically de facto 4 games and then Arkansas, Pine Bluff. Well, I kind of felt good about some of the games last week, actually. But this week I kind of feel like you did last week. And this game sort of personifies that for me. So I'm taking Missouri minus 16.5. I'm taking over 62.5. But to me, it's sort of flipping coins as far as my perspective. So not a game that I would advise personally anybody put any money on. But I guess we'll be head to head on the total, just so we have some kind of fun out of this game. But you're the Vandy guy, so we'll see if your knowledge of the program pays off on the side of the total here. For Nick Cole, I'm Christopher Smith for the 14, and we'll talk to you next week.